A local musician is teaming up with a new creative partner on music by composers based in Boston and Brazil to talk about their upcoming performance and album release. Our classical guitarist Aaron Larget-Caplan and violist Michael Hall. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
I want to start with Aaron here because this isn't just one performance we're talking about. You're talking about a whole series here.
Yes. The goal of the series, now Musique, is to explore the new and neglected in music, and with a bit of a guitar-centric idea, because I'm a guitarist. And so the 1 or 2 concerts a year, and Michael is our first guest to help debut the series.
Michael, viola is something we don't notice too much because it's somewhere between the violins and the cellos, but take us beyond that, because you're also an explorer of new music and different kinds of new music too.
Well, this is the golden era of composition for viola. There's this ambiguity of it, right? It's not defined as a violin and viola. You know those sounds immediately. But there's this wonderful sense now, an awakening to the perplexity, the ambiguity. So more compositions are being written for the viola than the violin in the last decade. And I've had over 50 written for me alone, but there's champions all over the world. That has allowed me to travel the world over hundreds of thousands of miles each year, flying to Indonesia, Thailand, and Europe to perform, premiere these pieces. And not just that, but then even start and empower communities with music, which is maybe one of the things that we both share a passion for. Not just performing, it's not about the cult of personality, but it's about empowering.
Aaron, one of the pieces that you're going to be performing pretty soon here is by a Brazilian composer, Celso Ribeiro. Tell us a little about the music first.
It's gorgeous. It's kind of heart-wrenching. Antonio wrote a piece for Michael, and when Michael and I decided to play together, Antonio on social media said, "I'm writing you a duo." And he wrote these 3 movements, portraits of fantastic, elegant women, ladies, reflecting on different emotions. So there's inducement in green, melancholy in yellow. And he likes to take an image, a physical image or a physical piece of a table or a lamp, and write a piece inspired by that. So he found these images of women from the 19th century and was inspired. And he wrote these pieces that have tinges of kind of a Jewish Sephardic sound to them at times. They're incredibly difficult, but at the same time they have this kind of folk element, lots of drones playing off each other, and it's Brazilian, so it's very rhythmic and exciting.
Lots of life in this music, without question. Everybody will enjoy these. They'll probably go out singing much of this, actually, as they walk out the door.
Michael, we just heard the excerpt from the melancholy yellow movement. It also reminded me a little about somebody playing like a Bach violin sonata, like a string player and a harpsichord.
Yeah. The colors work really well, don't they? Yeah. So you have that terse and brightness and clarity, and then the viola is a little bit more of almost like a singer, a vocalist. And then the movement that you just heard is kind of a crying aspect to it too.
And the 2 instruments, both of our instruments are kind of hidden. You know, the guitar because of the nylon strings, the classical guitar, it's not going to be as loud as a piano. And so the viola being, again, sandwiched between the violin and cello, we share a lot of the range, but our texture is so different. So all of the composers bring out elements to allow the timbres to change. The Samuel Adler, he writes the same material for both of us, but the textures are different. And so we have to find a way to communicate this to each other as well as to the audience. And it's very rhythmic, and then we'll become very lyrical, and then we go back to this, and we go back over here. It's amazing.
You know, the other thing, Aaron, a lot of times Michael has a sustained note, so he has the melody, and it's like you're playing for a singer too, right?
Exactly. And so a lot of what the guitar has to do is kind of give an illusion of sustain. And so we do a lot of drone, we'll do, try and make the notes sing as much as we can, but at the same time, we'll never be able to compete with his bow. And so I play a lot of notes.
It's interesting how we have this envy of each other's sounds, because you admire the bow, how I could just sustain and keep going with it. But at the same time, your instrument, once you pluck, it rings and resonates and just unfolds continuously.
Yeah.
Mine will have a quicker envelope closing to it. So I admire that aspect about his playing in the guitar.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Aaron Larget-Caplan and Michael Hall. Aaron, the other thing here that I like about this pairing is that it's so well balanced. Mm-hmm. You don't have a piano overwhelming a string instrument, and at the same time, we can hear you pretty clearly.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, remember, the piano has hammers, and they have a cast iron frame, and it's a beautiful instrument. Subtlety is not the piano. The guitar is never going to be as loud, but I can be very soft. And I have these colors when I play close to the bridge or over the sound hole. It allows it to have a spectrum. I have 4 middle Cs, and each one has its own taste and character. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm looking at a piece of music, I learn it maybe 1 or 2 different ways, and then I join Michael and I go, oh, that doesn't work. I have to switch and do this. I can't be heard, or I have to do this and adjust. And we have to find ways to communicate and still be heard. So he has to be very sensitive, because he's not playing in front of an orchestra or with piano. He's playing with just a guitar.
Michael, another thing that intrigues me about your background is that you travel. You don't just play music from around the world. You actually go places like Indonesia. What was that like for you?
Culture shock. It's an astonishing place. The reason I went there is I helped found the first professional orchestra in the country in a city called Bandung. The Bandung Philharmonic is in a city 3 times the size of Chicago. And this was all in an effort to create more of a collaboration and a positive interaction between Americans and Islamic communities, which we don't hear too often. We usually hear the negative interactions. And it's I go there as a learner. As much as I want to impart my knowledge and experience with the music, without question, I can't land as the imperial American coming in to dictate what is happening. I first learn, and you have to absorb what is actually taking place there, and the strengths of the community already in place. The culture is thousands of years older than ours. Mm-hmm. So to negate that would be foolish.
And of course, the other thing that intrigues me here is that you mentioned some of the multicultural overtones in your program. I mean, how does that relate to your mission with the series, at least?
Now Musique is my 2nd series that I've started in Boston. I live in Dorchester, and I ran a small series there for 4 years, because I always wanted people to know that music is alive. You don't have to always go to a concert hall or drive into the city and pay for parking and have this experience. And so Now Musique, yes, it's starting in Boston, but the growth of it will have aspects in Dorchester, in Roxbury, playing local composers as well as composers from around the world. And I want it to be seen as music isn't an elitist item. You know, Michael and we are, I would say, elite musicians. We work really hard, but I think that's very different than being an elitist. And I want Now Musique to represent now. I think too much of classical music is disconnected from what's happening now in politics or social life of the people that it's supposed to represent. So a Brazilian composer being played in Massachusetts makes complete sense to me. Having Francine Tresser on the program, Berkeley professor, makes sense to me. And then applying these other elements of composers who are local as well as in the world. And hopefully that relationship allows us to travel this program and allows those composers to come here and share their tastes of what's going on.
Michael, that Brazilian music at least sounded very approachable. I can imagine some people going to your concert who have not been to things like this very often, at least. How would you feel about people like that coming to hear you?
Oh, I think that would be perfect. Please, come. Come. Yeah, you know, it's not so much, when you go to a concert, it doesn't matter if it's pop music of any type or classical, you shouldn't mandate that everything already be accepted as a masterpiece. But you should give every piece a chance to become a masterpiece. which is a different train of thought. So you're trying things out. And you know, the difference between pop music and art music, whatever we want to call it nowadays, is art music should at least incite questions, multiple questions. The better the piece, the more questions that you're going to come away from that experience with, but as opposed to maybe pop culture, which is maybe sometimes, not all, but is escapism. Right. Doesn't really, you don't want to be forced to ask questions. So we want people to come because maybe the most insightful thing that we could gain from this is the feedback from the audience members. We have our experience with the piece, the history, the time we've shared together, but all of these other views from the audience members, their feedback is going to shape our view of the music and make it change because they will have a very unique take on it. Each person should walk away with a different perspective.
And how we play, it's not just us, we're with the composer. We have conversations with the composer. A couple of the composers will be at the concert, and then it becomes like a trio. And then after a time, maybe 3 performances, maybe 20, the piece is almost more ours than the composer's. And it becomes a part of us. And until we have that experience, or an audience member hears something for the first time, until they have that, there's something missing. So with a new piece of music, it can be a little scary. We give them that. And they don't have to like it. But once you have that experience, it can never be repeated. And then, so a first time, it can be exquisite. So that's what we invite people to come and question.
Certainly make a bigger impression if people are hearing you live. Finally, we should have one more reminder. This is going to be at Arlington Street Church. When and where exactly?
Arlington Street Church on Boylston and Arlington in Boston at 7 p.m. on Saturday. Tickets are available online or at the door. Nowmusique.com, and that's the French spelling of musique. And it'll be a wonderful concert. Come and meet Kevin Siegfried, Francine Trester, and others who will be there. And we hope that it'll be a long relationship for us as well as for the series.
Thank you both very much, Aaron Larget-Caplan and Michael Hall.